Picture this, a quiet morning in Napa Valley. The kind where the golden hills glow under the early sun and the air smells of wild rosemary and earth. It's peaceful, almost magical, the kind of place where people come to relax, to breathe, to feel alive. But on one of those mornings, something unimaginable happened. A young woman, full of life and energy, went for a simple jog and never came back. Her name was Veronica Hensley. She was 28, a physical therapist, a marathon runner, and someone who found peace in the rhythm of her own footsteps on the trail. She was supposed to be back home by 10 a.m. She never made it. Her car was still parked at the trailhead, untouched. Her phone went silent, and the only thing left behind was a trail of unanswered questions. For 2 long years, her family, her boyfriend David, and everyone who loved her searched for answers. They combed through miles of rugged terrain, followed every lead, and held on to hope that she might still be out there somewhere. But the forest stayed quiet. The hills gave up nothing. The case went cold, and Veronica's story became just another missing person file buried in the system. Then, out of nowhere, something truly unexpected happened. A retired chef named Michael Petro was out in the woods with his truffle hunting pig named Rosie, doing what they loved, searching for gourmet treasures hidden beneath the roots of ancient oak trees. That morning, Rosie started digging like she'd never dug before. Something under the soil caught her attention, something buried deep beneath layers of dirt and time. And when Michael finally pulled it free, his hands were holding a plastic bag that hadn't seen the light of day in years. Inside that bag was a pile of clothes, a pink and white sports bra, black running shorts, and other items that didn't belong in the forest. The color of the clothing, the style, everything about it felt eerily familiar. It was like something out of a nightmare. And when Michael's wife Sarah snapped a photo of it, her mind flashed back to the news stories. The posters, the face of a missing woman who used to run those trails every morning. Veronica. They called the police. The moment the detectives saw the photo, they knew this wasn't just another discovery. This was the discovery. The case that had gone cold was suddenly burning hot again. And the trail of evidence was about to lead them straight to the man who had been hiding in plain sight for years. A man who watched women run, who took pictures of them without their knowing, who had built a quiet life while hiding a dark and deadly secret. But before we go further, let's rewind. Let's go back to the beginning, to Veronica's life, to the people who loved her, and to the morning she disappeared without a trace. Because what came next was more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Veronica Hensley wasn't just another name in a missing persons file. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a lover, and a runner who found peace in the rhythm of her own breath. Her life was filled with small, beautiful routines. The way she tied her pink running shoes just a little tighter than most. How she always carried a protein bar in her waist pack. And the way she smiled at strangers on the trail like she knew them. People who met her even once remembered her. She had that kind of presence, the kind that made you feel like you mattered, even if you only crossed paths for a moment. Her disappearance didn't just shatter the lives of those closest to her. It left a hole in the entire Napa Valley running community. The trails she once jogged every morning became haunted places, where every rustle in the brush made people stop and look over their shoulders. Her story wasn't just about one woman vanishing. It was about the loss of innocence, the sudden awareness that even the most familiar places could hold terrible secrets. David Chen had known Veronica for 3 years before she disappeared. They met at a local 1OK race, where she finished second and he came in just behind her. She waited at the finish line for him, not because she knew him, but because she saw him limping toward the end and thought he might need help. That was Veronica, always looking out for others, even when she was exhausted herself. They started dating a few months later, drawn together by their shared love of the outdoors and the quiet comfort of each other's company. Their life together was simple, grounded in early morning runs, weekend hikes, and long conversations over coffee. There was no drama, no secrets, just a steady, growing love that felt like it would last forever. When Veronica went missing, David's world collapsed. He replayed every moment of their last conversation, every glance, every word. He kept thinking about the way she leaned against that wooden signpost, the way the sun caught her hair, the way she smiled into the camera. He told himself he should have noticed something, a hesitation in her voice, a flicker of concern in her eyes. But there was nothing, just a beautiful, ordinary moment that had somehow become the last one they ever shared. The days after her disappearance were a blur of frantic phone calls, endless waiting, and the slow, crushing realization that she wasn't coming back. At first, David clung to hope. He joined search parties, walked miles of trail, called every contact he could think of. He posted on social media, handed out flyers, and gave interviews to local news stations. But as the weeks turned into months, and the search grew colder, the hope began to fade. The silence became unbearable. Veronica's family went through the same agony. Her parents, quiet, hard-working people who had raised their daughters with love and discipline, were devastated. Her younger sister Jessica became the family's emotional anchor, the one who refused to let the world forget about Veronica. She created the Facebook page, organized the memorial runs, and worked tirelessly to keep the case in the public eye. She believed, with every fiber of her being, that someone out there knew something, that someone had seen something that could bring them closer to the truth. But no matter how many posters they put up or how many times they pleaded on the news, no one came forward with real information. The police followed every lead, but none of them led anywhere. The man arguing with a woman by the pickup truck, no one could find him. The flasher who had scared another jogger, he vanished without a trace. The only real clue they had was that single pink shoelace tangled in the thorns of a manzanita bush hundreds of yards off the trail. It was a piece of a puzzle that no one could solve. The months passed, and the media moved on. Other tragedies filled the headlines. Veronica's face, once so familiar on local news, disappeared from the screens. But for her family and friends, the pain never lessened. It just settled deeper, like a wound that never quite heals. They carried the weight of unanswered questions. The unbearable what-ifs. Had she been taken? Had she fought back? Had she been afraid? Or had it all happened too fast for her to even understand what was happening? The forest that had swallowed her whole remained silent. No one knew what had happened on that trail, but everyone who searched for her could feel it. Something had gone terribly, horribly wrong. Then, just when it seemed like the case would remain a mystery forever, the truffle hunter's pig began to dig. Michael Petro and his wife Sarah had no idea what they were about to uncover. They weren't looking for a missing woman, they were looking for mushrooms. But when Rosie, the pig, started digging with such intensity, they knew something was different. What they found was disturbing: a plastic bag filled with running clothes, a used condom, and a tampon. It wasn't just a random discovery. It was a message from the past, buried beneath layers of dirt and time. When Sarah snapped the photo, her mind immediately went to Veronica. She remembered the news stories, the missing person posters, the haunting image of a smiling blonde woman in running gear. She knew, without a doubt, that what they had found was connected to Veronica's case. And that meant the forest hadn't kept its secret forever after all. The police were called. The crime scene was secured. The evidence was collected and sent to the lab. And then came the long, agonizing wait for results. The DNA from the condom would either give them a name or leave them back where they started. But for David, for Jessica, for Veronica's parents, this was the first real hope they had felt in 2 years. Still, the mystery wasn't solved. The clothes were found, but Veronica herself was still missing. The DNA might point to a suspect, but it wouldn't tell them what happened that morning. It wouldn't tell them who had been watching her for weeks, who had waited in the shadows of the trail for her to run past. It wouldn't tell them how she had died, or if she had suffered, and it wouldn't tell them why. The forest had given up one piece of the puzzle, but the rest remained hidden. The truth was still buried somewhere in the hills, waiting to be uncovered. And whoever had taken Veronica from the world, they were still out there. Somewhere. The discovery of Veronica Hensley's running clothes buried beneath an ancient oak tree was more than just a break in the case. It was a turning point that sent shockwaves through the Napa Valley community. The plastic bag, filled with items that screamed of violence and violation, had been hidden away for 2 years, sealed in the earth like a secret that had finally grown too heavy to keep. But even with the evidence in hand, the story wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. Detective Dave Riley had seen a lot in his years on the force, but nothing could have prepared him for the weight of this case. He remembered the early days of the search, how he'd stood at the trailhead watching the volunteers pour their hearts into finding a woman they'd never met just because it was the right thing to do. He remembered the exhaustion in David Chen's eyes, the way Veronica's sister Jessica never stopped fighting, and the silence that had settled over the forest like a thick, unbreakable fog. Now, 2 years later, he found himself staring at the crime lab report, the words DNA match standing out like a flashing beacon. For the first time since Veronica disappeared, he felt something close to hope, but it was wrapped in dread. The name on the report was Mark Jennings, a landscaper, a quiet man, a loner, the kind of person who blended into the background, unnoticed by most. He had no criminal record of violence, just a minor offense from over a decade ago, indecent exposure. It was the kind of thing that didn't raise red flags unless you were already looking for them. And now, suddenly, every detail of his life became significant. His rental house on the outskirts of town, his daily routines, the way he drove slowly past jogging trails, the way he watched women run. The surveillance began immediately. Officers in unmarked cars followed Jennings as he went about his day, picking up supplies at the garden center, mowing lawns in quiet neighborhoods, eating alone at diners. There was nothing outwardly suspicious about him. He didn't seem to know he was being watched. He didn't run, he didn't hide. He just kept moving, like a man who had never once thought he'd be caught. But the deeper they dug, the more disturbing the picture became. His home was sparse, almost sterile. No family photos, no personal touches, just a man living alone in a world of his own making. But his computer told a different story. Hidden behind layers of passwords was a folder filled with hundreds of photographs, all of women. Joggers, hikers, cyclists. Women unaware they were being watched. Women captured mid-stride, mid-laugh, mid-thought. It was a collection of stolen moments, gathered like trophies, and among them, dozens of images of Veronica Hensley. She was everywhere, running alone on the trail, pausing to stretch beneath the trees, smiling at her phone camera as she took a selfie. It was clear Jennings had been watching her for weeks, maybe longer. He had memorized her schedule, her habits, her patterns. He knew when she ran. He knew where she parked. He knew exactly how to find her. Detective Riley felt his stomach twist as he flipped through the images. This wasn't just obsession. This was surveillance. This was planning. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was calculated, and it was terrifying. The team worked quickly to build a case. The DNA from the condom was the strongest link, but they needed more. They needed to prove that Jennings had been on the trail that day, that he had been near Veronica, that he had followed her. They needed to show that this wasn't just one crime, it was part of a pattern. And then came the next chilling discovery. As forensic analysts went through the digital files, they began cross-referencing the faces in the photos with missing persons cases from surrounding counties. At first, it was just a hunch, a way to see if Jennings had been active elsewhere. But soon, the connections started to emerge. A woman who vanished while walking her dog in Sonoma. Another who disappeared after a late-night jog in Lake County. Another who was last seen hiking alone near a remote trail in Mendocino. All missing. All with photos in Jennings' collection. The realization hit like a cold wave. They weren't just dealing with one killer. They were dealing with a serial predator who had been operating under the radar for years. He had been hiding in plain sight, moving from county to county, leaving behind no bodies, no evidence, just missing women and unanswered questions. And now, for the first time, he had made a mistake. The warrant was signed within hours. The plan was set, a pre-dawn raid, a full tactical response. No chances, no warnings. Jennings would not have the opportunity to destroy anything else. As the SWAT team moved in, Riley stood back, watching the quiet neighborhood wake up to the chaos. Dogs barked, curtains twitched, neighbors peered out from behind blinds, trying to understand what was happening. Then the door was breached. The sound of the battering ram echoed through the street. And just like that, Mark Jennings was in custody, but even as the officers led him away, he didn't look scared. He didn't look angry, he looked confused, like he couldn't understand how he had been found, like he had believed, all this time, that he would never be caught. Inside his house, the forensic team worked methodically, collecting everything. His clothes, his phone, his laptop. They found more photos, more notes, more evidence of a life spent watching women, cataloging them, studying them. It was a predator's archive, built over years. And yet, there was still one question that remained unanswered. Where was Veronica? The confession came slowly, in pieces, over hours of interrogation. Jennings didn't deny everything, but he didn't admit it all either. He spoke of Veronica like she was an inevitability, like she had been part of his life long before he ever touched her. He described the trail, the moment he saw her, the way she ran. He told them how he waited, how he followed, how he attacked. But when they asked where he had buried her, he hesitated. He knew they had her clothes. He knew they had his DNA. But he also knew that unless they found her body, they couldn't prove he had killed her. And without that, they couldn't bring charges that would keep him behind bars for good. So he made a deal in exchange for a plea bargain. No death penalty. He would lead them to her remains. The next morning, a convoy of police vehicles followed Jennings deep into the wilderness, miles from where the truffle hunter's pig had uncovered the first clue. He pointed to a spot beneath a grove of bay trees, where the earth looked untouched. The excavation team worked carefully, brushing away layers of soil, searching for any sign of human remains. And then, finally, they found her. Veronica Hensley was coming home, but for her family, for David, for the people who had never stopped searching, the discovery brought no relief. It brought only the confirmation of their worst fears. The end of the waiting, the beginning of the mourning. And yet, even with her body recovered, even with Jennings in custody, the story wasn't over. Because the question remained, how many others had he taken? Because the photos on his computer were just the beginning. And the search for the rest of his victims had only just begun. The interrogation room was quiet except for the hum of the overhead lights and the occasional scratch of a pen on a notepad. Mark Jennings sat across the table from Detective Dave Riley, his face pale, his hands folded in front of him like he was waiting for someone to offer him a cup of tea. There was no rage in his eyes, no remorse, just a strange kind of detachment, like he was watching a movie he had no part in. The confession had been a breakthrough, but it wasn't enough, not yet. Riley leaned forward, his voice low and steady. Where is she, Mark? Where did you put her? Jennings blinked slowly, like he was trying to remember. Then he looked up, his expression almost blank. I don't know what you mean. Riley didn't flinch. He slid another photo across the table, a still from surveillance footage. grainy but clear enough. It showed Jennings driving past the CHNH trailhead just days before Veronica disappeared. His face was visible in the driver's seat, eyes fixed on the path ahead. "You were there," Riley said. "You watched her. You followed her. You took her. Now tell me where she is." Jennings stared at the photo for a long time. Then he smiled, just a slight twitch at the corner of his lips, barely enough to be called a smile at all. "I didn't take her," he said softly. "She was already mine." The words sent a chill through the room. Riley exchanged a glance with the detective sitting beside him. This wasn't a confession, it was a performance. They pressed him for hours, going over every detail of the case. They showed him the photos they had found on his computer. Veronica running, Veronica stretching, Veronica laughing into her phone camera. They played the lab results, the DNA match, the recovered clothes. They even brought up the truffle, Hunter's pig, the plastic bag buried beneath the oak tree. Jennings listened to it all in silence, occasionally nodding like he was hearing the story for the first time. Finally, just when Riley thought they were getting nowhere, Jennings leaned forward and whispered, "I'll take you to her, but not for free." It was the opening they needed. The deal was made quickly. In exchange for leading the police to Veronica's remains, Jennings would avoid the death penalty. It was a bitter agreement, but one that had to be made. Without her body, there would be no closure for her family, no final justice, no way to prove that she had been murdered at all. The next morning, a convoy of unmarked cars followed Jennings deep into the wilderness, miles from where the plastic bag had been found. The sky was overcast, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches swaying in the cold wind like they were watching. Jennings pointed to a spot beneath a grove of bay trees, where the ground was uneven and covered in a thick layer of leaf litter. The forensic team got to work immediately, marking the area, setting up equipment, preparing for a careful excavation. The digging began slowly, methodically. The sound of shovels against dirt filled the air, mixed with the distant calls of birds and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Every few minutes, the team would pause, brush away the loose soil, scan the area for any sign of remains. And then, just after noon, one of the technicians called out. They had found something. The team moved in closer, kneeling around the spot. The soil was disturbed, the roots of nearby plants tangled around what looked like a bundle of fabric. With gloved hands, they carefully cleared away the dirt, revealing the outline of a body wrapped in layers of plastic. The silence was heavy. Veronica Hensley had been found. But even as the news was relayed back to her family, even as the weight of 2 years of unanswered questions began to lift, the story wasn't over. Not yet, because Jennings wasn't done talking. Back at the station, he asked for another interview. He said he had more to say, more to show. Riley hesitated before agreeing. Something about the way Jennings had spoken, the way his eyes had lit up just slightly, made him uneasy. This wasn't just a confession, it was a game. When they sat down again, Jennings reached into his pocket and pulled out a small worn notebook. He opened it to a page filled with neat, precise handwriting. "I kept track," he said quietly, "of all of them." Riley's stomach twisted. "All of them." Jennings nodded. "She wasn't the first, and I don't think she was the last." The room went cold. The detectives flipped through the pages, their eyes scanning the names, dates, locations. Some were familiar, missing persons from nearby counties, women who had vanished without a trace. Others were unknown, just names scribbled in the margins. And then they found something even more disturbing. A recent entry, less than a month old. A new name, a new location. Someone else was missing, and Mark Jennings knew exactly who it was. The interrogation room was quiet, but the air inside felt heavier than it had all week. Detective Dave Riley sat across from Mark Jennings, the man who had already confessed to Veronica Hensley's murder in cold, detached tones. But now, something had changed. Jennings had stopped talking. He sat with his hands folded, staring at the table, a faint smirk playing at the corners of his lips. It was the kind of silence that didn't come from fear or guilt. It came from control. Riley leaned forward, his voice low. "You told us where Veronica was. That was your deal. Now you tell us about the others." Jennings tilted his head, slightly, like he was considering the request. Then he said, almost casually, "I don't remember." Riley's jaw tightened. He had seen all kinds of killers in his years on the force, some remorseful, some angry, some completely unhinged. But Jennings was different. He wasn't just a predator. He was a collector, a manipulator. And now, he was playing games. The photos on his computer had already led to the reopening of at least 5 missing persons cases. Women who had vanished under eerily similar circumstances, joggers, hikers, cyclists, all captured in stolen moments before disappearing without a trace. The detectives had hoped that Jennings would be eager to talk, to brag, to prove how clever he had been. But instead, he was holding back, letting the silence stretch like a noose around the necks of the families still waiting for answers. Back at the command center, the mood was tense. The discovery of Veronica's remains had brought some closure. but it had also opened a floodgate. Now, every unsolved missing persons case in Northern California was being re-examined under the shadow of Mark Jennings. Detectives from Sonoma, Mendocino, and Lake County had been brought in, combing through the hundreds of photos found on his computer, trying to match faces, locations, and timelines. One of the lead analysts, a young woman named Karen Leo, was going through the files late at night when something caught her eye. It was a photo, just one among hundreds, but something about it felt off. It showed a woman jogging on a trail, her face partially obscured by shadows, but her clothing was unmistakable. A bright red tank top with a small tear near the hem. Karen had seen that exact outfit in a missing persons report from 2 years earlier. A woman named Emily Torres, a 24-year-old yoga instructor from Santa Rosa, had vanished after going for a run near Fitch Mountain. Her case had gone cold, almost immediately, no witnesses, no leads, no evidence. And yet, here she was, frozen in time, captured by a man who had clearly been watching her for weeks. Karen flagged the image and sent it to the team. Within hours, they had found more. Dozens of them. Women from different towns, different counties, all running the same trails, all unaware they were being stalked. Some of them had disappeared years before Veronica. Some had vanished just months ago. The realization hit like a thunderclap. Jennings hadn't just been a local predator, he had been operating across county lines, moving quietly from one jurisdiction to the next, always staying just ahead of suspicion. He wasn't just a killer, he was a ghost, and now, he was refusing to talk. Back at the station, the interrogation continued. Riley tried every angle, guilt, logic, even appeals to Jennings' own twisted sense of pride. But the man remained silent. When pressed, he simply said, "I don't remember where I put them. I was careful, it was a lie." They all knew it. Jennings knew exactly where the others were. He just didn't want to say, not yet. He was making them suffer, making the families suffer. He had spent years perfecting his craft, and now that he was caught, he was treating his silence like a final act of control. The pressure mounted. News of the reopened cases spread like wildfire. Families who had spent years clinging to the faintest hope that their loved ones might still be alive were suddenly faced with the terrifying possibility that they had been dead all along. Some were grateful for the renewed attention. Others were furious. Furious that the system had missed Jennings for so long. Furious that he had been allowed to continue his crimes unchecked. Veronica's boyfriend, David Chen, had been keeping his distance from the investigation, trying to rebuild his life in the wake of her death. But when he learned that Jennings was refusing to talk about the other victims, something inside him snapped. He reached out to the detectives and asked to be present during the next interrogation. Riley was hesitant. "You don't have to do this," he told David. "I do," David said. "She was mine. And I need to know what he did to her. I need to know if she was alone." So, the next morning, David sat in the observation room, watching through the two-way glass, as Riley once again tried to break Jennings. But the man just sat there, staring at the table, unresponsive. Then, without warning, David stepped into the room. Jennings looked up, surprised. Then, slowly, he smiled. David didn't sit. He stood over the table, his voice shaking but firm. "Tell me what you did to her." Jennings tilted his head. "You already know." "No," David said. "I know what you told them. I want to hear it from you. I want to know if she fought you. I want to know if she screamed." The room went still. Jennings stared at him for a long moment. Then, softly, he said, "She fought, she screamed. But no one heard her." David's hands clenched into fists. His entire body trembled. "Where was she when she died?" Jennings chuckled. "Right where you ran with her. Just a little deeper into the trees." David's breath caught. That trail, that place where they had shared so many quiet moments. The place where he had taken the last photo of her, that was where she had died. But before he could ask anything else, Jennings leaned forward and whispered, "You want to know the best part?" David didn't answer. Jennings grinned. "I'm not done yet." The room went cold. Riley exchanged a look with the detective beside him. "What are you talking about?" Jennings didn't answer. He just sat back in his chair, still smiling. And that's when they realized, Jennings wasn't done because he had more bodies to reveal, he was done because he had one more left to take. The interrogation room was silent except for the hum of the overhead lights and the faint scratching of a pen on a notepad. Mark Jennings sat across the table from Detective Dave Riley, his face pale, his eyes distant, like he was watching a movie only he could see. The confession had come slowly at first, but now it was pouring out of him like water breaking through. A damn cold, methodical, horrifying. He described the trail that morning with chilling precision. How he had followed Veronica from a distance, memorizing the rhythm of her steps, the way her ponytail bounced with every stride. How he had waited in the shadows of the trees, heart pounding, breath shallow, until she passed. How he had stepped out behind her, silent at first, then grabbed her before she could scream. Riley didn't flinch. He let Jennings talk, let him weave his own noose with every word. Jennings spoke of the attack like it was inevitable. like Veronica had somehow invited it. He described the struggle, the way she fought, the way she screamed, the way her eyes widened in terror. And then he described the moment he killed her, the way her body went limp, the silence that followed, the sudden clarity that he had taken something that could never be returned. He told them where he had buried her. The next morning, a convoy of unmarked cars followed Jennings deep into the wilderness. Miles from where the truffle hunter's pig had uncovered the first clue, the sky was overcast, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches swaying like they were watching. Jennings pointed to a spot beneath a grove of bay trees, where the ground was uneven and covered in a thick layer of leaf litter. The forensic team worked carefully, brushing away the loose soil, scanning the area for any sign of human remains. And then, finally, they found her. Veronica Hensley was coming home. But even with her body recovered, even with Jennings in custody, the story wasn't over, because the photos on his computer were just the beginning. Back at the station, the detectives combed through the hundreds of images Jennings had collected over the years. They matched faces, locations, timelines. They reopened missing persons cases from surrounding counties. One by one, the puzzle pieces clicked into place. Jennings had been operating for years. He wasn't just a killer, he was a serial predator. The arrest and trial moved quickly. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA, photographs, his own confession. It was more than enough to seal his fate. In a plea deal that spared him the death penalty, Jennings was sentenced to multiple life sentences without parole. Family, for David, for the people who had never stopped searching. It was the closest thing to justice they would ever get. But the story wasn't over, because one photo remained unaccounted for. It was buried deep in Jennings' files, hidden behind layers of passwords and encryption. A woman jogging on a trail, her face partially obscured by shadows, her clothing unmistakable, a bright red tank top with a small tear near the hem. Karen Liu, the analyst who had first flagged the image, stared at the screen for a long moment. She had seen that outfit before. She typed a name into the database. Emily Torres, a yoga instructor from Santa Rosa. Missing since 2018. Karen's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed another name, and another, and another. One by one, the missing women started to emerge, but there was one more. A recent photo, less than a month old, a new name, a new location. Someone else was missing, and Mark Jennings knew exactly who it was. The realization hit like a thunderclap. Jennings hadn't just been confessing. He had been playing them. He had led them to Veronica, yes, but he had also led them to this, the final devastating truth. He hadn't stopped. He had taken someone else. And now, with him behind bars, the trail had gone cold all over again. Detective Riley stood outside the interrogation room, staring at the man who had taken so much from so many. Jennings looked up, his expression blank. Then, slowly, he smiled. "I told you," he whispered. "I'm not done yet." The room went cold, because the truth was undeniable. Mark Jennings had an accomplice. The arrest of Mark Jennings sent shockwaves through the Napa Valley community. A man who had lived quietly among them, who mowed lawns and trimmed hedges, had been a predator hiding in plain sight. The discovery of Veronica Hensley's remains brought a measure of closure to her loved ones, but it also exposed a much darker truth. Jennings had been hunting women for years. The hundreds of stolen photographs found on his computer revealed a chilling pattern of obsession, stalking, and likely murder. Veronica was not his first victim. And, terrifyingly, she might not have been his last. As detectives combed through the images, they began matching faces to missing persons reports from surrounding counties. Women who had vanished without a trace, joggers, hikers, cyclists, all captured in stolen moments before disappearing from the world. Some of these cases were years old. Some were recent. All of them pointed to the same monster. The breakthrough came when a detective recognized a familiar silver hoop earring in one of the photos. It matched a description from the family of a woman who had gone missing from a trail in Lake County over 5 years ago. Another image showed a woman wearing a distinctive sea turtle keychain on her backpack, a detail remembered by the sister of a missing college student from Sonoma. The connections were undeniable. Jennings had been operating across county lines, slipping through the cracks of different jurisdictions, always staying just ahead of suspicion. The investigation expanded rapidly. Detectives from Sonoma, Mendocino, and Lake County joined the case, working tirelessly to identify the other women in Jennings' collection of stolen moments. Some of the faces were already familiar, women who had been reported missing but never linked to a suspect. Others remained unidentified, their names and stories buried beneath years of unanswered questions. Jennings, now behind bars, refused to talk about most of his victims. He had confessed to Veronica's murder, but when pressed about the others, he simply said, "I don't remember." It was a cruel final act of control, a refusal to give the families the answers they desperately needed. But the truth had a way of surfacing. During the trial, prosecutors presented a devastating timeline. Of Jennings' behavior, surveillance footage showed him driving past popular jogging trails, slowing his truck to watch women run. His computer revealed a pattern of stalking, weeks of observation before each disappearance. Investigators found receipts for hotel stays near the trails where other women had vanished. The evidence painted a picture of a man who had perfected his craft over years of undetected violence. Jennings was sentenced to multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. He would never walk free again. But for the families of his victims, it was not justice. Not really. Nothing could bring back their daughters, their sisters, their friends. But at least now, they had answers. At least now, they knew the truth. Veronica's boyfriend, David Chin, attended the sentencing. Hearing he had spent 2 years living in a limbo of grief and uncertainty, wondering what had happened to the woman he loved. Now, he had a final answer, but it didn't bring peace. It brought only the brutal clarity of knowing that Veronica had been taken by a man who saw her not as a person, but as a target. In the months that followed, the Napa Valley community began to heal slowly, painfully. The trails that had once felt like sanctuaries now carried a new kind of awareness. Women who ran alone began carrying pepper spray. Hikers formed groups for safety. Park rangers increased patrols. Emergency call boxes were installed at major trailheads, ensuring that no one would ever again be completely cut off from help. Veronica's sister, Jessica, continued her work to keep her sister's memory alive. She expanded the Find Veronica Hensley's Facebook page, turning it into a resource for families of missing persons. She organized annual memorial runs, bringing together runners from across the region to honor Veronica and others who had vanished. The event became more than just remembrance, it became a call to action, a reminder that no one should be forgotten. The story of Veronica's disappearance and the capture of her killer is a dark tapestry woven with tragedy, obsession, and relentless police work. But it is impossible to tell without acknowledging the final, improbable thread, the one of pure chance. The resolution hinged on a series of events so unlikely they border on the miraculous. If Michael Petro, the retired chef, hadn't chosen that specific remote patch of woods for his truffle hunt that October morning. If his pig, Rosie, with her keen and determined snout, hadn't been drawn to that exact spot beneath the old oak tree. If she hadn't dug with such unusual insistence. If Michael and Sarah hadn't understood the gravity of what they'd found. If any one of those things had not happened, the plastic bag containing the key to the entire mystery might have remained buried in the earth for decades, its secrets slowly decaying into nothing. Mark Jennings might have continued his quiet, predatory existence, perhaps claiming more victims, his dark hobby hidden behind the mask of a lonely landscaper, and Veronica's family might have spent the rest of their lives wondering what had happened to her. The capture of Jennings was not just a victory for justice. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest, most unexpected moments can change everything. A pig digging for truffles. A retired chef recognizing the significance of what he had found. A determined sister refusing to let her loved one be forgotten. That was a stark reminder that sometimes in the search for justice, the most crucial clue can be unearthed, not by technology or forensics, but by the simple, persistent instinct of an animal searching for a treasure in the dirt. Veronica Hensley was finally laid to rest. Her memorial bench stands at the CHNH trailhead, overlooking the path she loved so much. It is a quiet place of reflection, a reminder of the life she lived and the tragedy that took her from the world. But it is also a symbol of resilience, of a community that refused to let her be forgotten, and of a story that, despite its darkness, ended with the light of truth. And as runners pass by the bench each morning, as the sun rises over the golden hills of Napa Valley, Veronica's spirit remains not as a victim, but as a beacon of strength, of love, of the unbreakable bond between those who refuse to stop searching for the truth.